Kojo Mensah sold
Please,
the only thing
save my
standing
little
between
girl.
his
I will
family
never
and
forget
hunger,
this.
his wooden fishing boat, to save a little girl he had never met.
Kojo sold
Before
his only
sunset,
boat for a
the
complete
sea
stranger.
no longer belonged to
Now
him.
he walks alone.
By the end of that
Neighbors
week,
call him a fool.
even the people in
He
his
gave
own
away his
neighborhood
future.
were calling him a fool. They said, no wise man throws away his future for a stranger. They said, kindness does not pay rent. They said, sacrifice is beautiful only when it is someone else making it. And maybe they were right. Because after Kojo gave up everything to save that child, he lost his work, his income, his pride, and almost the trust of the people he loved most. But 3 months later, on a morning when the harbor was wrapped in silence and the air smelled of salt and wet rope, a black convoy stopped at the shore. A little girl stepped out. She walked toward the man who had once gone hungry for her. And what happened next left the entire town speechless. This is the story of Kojo Mensah, a young fisherman from Elmina, and how one impossible decision changed not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. If you enjoy powerful African stories with deep lessons, stay with me until the end, because this story will remind you that sometimes the seed of your miracle is hidden inside your greatest loss. Every morning before dawn, while most of the town was still asleep, Kojo was already awake. He would rise from the thin mat beside the window, wash his face with cold water from a blue plastic bucket, and stand for a moment in the darkness, listening to the wind, to the distant cry of gulls, to the sea. The sea had been his inheritance, not because his father had left him money. There had been no money. Not because his father had left him land. There had been no land either. What his father left him was an old wooden fishing boat called Nyame Nhyira, God's blessing. It was not beautiful. The paint was fading. One side had been repaired so many times it looked like patchwork. The engine coughed more than it purred. But to Kojo, that boat was not just wood and nails. It was school fees for his younger sister, Elmina. It was medicine for his aging mother, Essie. It was food in the cooking pot. It was dignity. It was hope. Kojo was 28 years old, strong, disciplined, and quiet in the way men become when life has taught them to carry burdens without announcing them. He lived in a small 2-room house with his mother and Elmina at the edge of town, where the road turned from asphalt to red earth, and children chased old tires through puddles after the rain. His mother sold smoked fish in the market. His sister, Elmina, had just received admission to nursing college in Cape Coast. It was the kind of news that should have filled a home with dancing, and for one night, it did. But joy can be heavy when it arrives with a price tag. The admission letter came with fees Kojo could barely imagine. Registration, hostel payment, books, uniform, transport. Each item on the list felt like a stone placed one by one on his chest. Still, he refused to give in to fear. He had made a plan. If the fishing season remained good, and if the outboard motor survived, and if the trader in Takoradi paid him what she owed, and if the roof did not collapse in the next storm, he could do it. It was a fragile plan, but poor families often survive on fragile plans. One evening, as the sky turned gold over the harbor, Elmina sat beside him near the shore. "Brother," she said softly, "if it is too much, I can wait 1 more year." Kojo did not even look at her. "No," he said. "But—" "No." She fell silent. Kojo finally turned and smiled, though it was the tired smile of a man already negotiating with hardship in his mind. "You have waited enough," he told her. "You studied by lantern light. You passed your exams when people said, 'Village girls do not go far.' You will go." Abina's eyes filled with tears. "What if the money does not come?" Kojo looked at the sea. Then he answered with a calmness he did not truly feel. "It will come." Their mother, Essie, heard that conversation from the doorway that night, and long after the children had slept, she sat awake alone. A mother always knows when hope is hanging by a thread. 3 days later, the town woke to a restless sky. The wind was strange that morning, warm, unsettled, carrying the smell of rain long before the clouds appeared. Kojo returned from the sea earlier than usual with a modest catch. Not enough to celebrate, but enough to keep disappointment away for one more day. He tied his boat near the old wooden jetty, loaded the fish into crates, and began pushing them toward the market road. The streets were filling with noise, women balancing baskets on their heads, taxi drivers shouting, hawkers weaving through traffic, schoolchildren in faded uniforms. The normal living heartbeat of a town too busy surviving to notice another person's sorrow. Kojo had almost reached the road junction near St. Peter's Clinic when he heard the scream. It was the kind of scream that makes the whole world narrow. He turned. A woman in a torn yellow wrapper was kneeling beside a little girl on the ground. The child could not have been more than 7. Her body was limp. Her breathing came in frightened, broken gasps. People had already gathered in a circle. As always, there were many eyes, very few hands. The woman was crying uncontrollably. "Please," she shouted. "Please help me! Somebody help my daughter!" Kojo pushed through the crowd. "What happened?" "She collapsed," the woman cried. "She has had these attacks before. We were trying to get to the clinic. They said she needs oxygen now. Now!" The clinic gates were open, but a nurse stood there looking helpless. "We need a deposit before we can begin the full emergency procedure," the nurse said anxiously. "The oxygen is available, but the consultant must be called, and the machine—" The woman clutched Kojo's arm. "I was robbed in the lorry park," she said through tears. "My phone, my bag, everything. I have no money. My sister is in Kumasi. I cannot reach her. Please, sir, please, if this child dies—" She could not finish the sentence. Kojo looked down at the girl. Her lips were beginning to darken. Her fingers were trembling. He asked the nurse, "How much?" The answer came like a hammer. The woman beside him let out a hopeless cry. The crowd murmured, "Too much, far too much." One man shook his head and walked away. Another whispered, "This is not your problem." A woman holding tomatoes under an umbrella said, "These things are sad, but everyone has their own troubles." Kojo reached into his pocket. Not enough. He checked the money tied in a cloth inside his shirt. Still not enough. That money was meant for Abina's first school payment. His chest tightened. He looked at the little girl again. Then he looked at the road. Then at the harbor in the distance. The buyer. Old Kwesi, the canoe trader, was still at the shore that morning. Kojo knew because he had seen him inspecting boats. And suddenly, a terrible possibility entered his mind. His boat. No, not the boat. Anything but the boat. But there was no time. The child's breathing was getting weaker. The mother was shaking. The nurse was already calling for help inside. Kojo closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he made the decision that would change everything. "Wait here," he said, and he ran. He ran like a man being chased by fire. past the market stalls, past the rusted buses, past children playing draughts under a neem tree, past the smell of diesel and smoked fish and wet sand. By the time he reached the shore, his lungs were burning. Old Kwesi was there exactly where he had hoped, standing near the boats with two younger men. Kojo did not waste breath. "You want to buy a boat?" he asked. Kwesi looked surprised. "Yours?" "Yes, now." Kwesi narrowed his eyes. "Now?" "Now." The old trader laughed a little. "A man who is not desperate does not sell his boat in the middle of the season." Kojo said nothing. Kwesi walked around Nyame Nhyira, kicked one side, checked the engine, touched the patched wood, and named a price so low it felt like an insult. Kojo's jaw tightened. "That is robbery." Kwesi shrugged. "Then keep your boat." Kojo looked back toward the town, toward the clinic, toward a child who might be dying while men argued over the value of old wood. "Add something," he said. Kwesi added almost nothing. It was still a terrible price. It was still unfair. It was still not what the boat was worth. But mercy does not always wait for a better bargain. Kojo took the offer. The old man counted out the money slowly, painfully slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. Kojo wanted to scream. Instead, he snatched the notes, signed the transfer paper with a shaking hand, and stood frozen for 1 second after it was done. The boat was no longer his. The rope tied to the post was no longer his rope. The engine was no longer his engine. The life he had spent years protecting had just been handed to another man for far less than it deserved. But he did not allow himself to grieve. Not yet. He ran back to the clinic. The woman was still there, praying through tears, and when Kojo put the money into the nurse's hand, no one spoke. Even the crowd became quiet. The mother stared at him as though she had just seen something impossible. "You sold something," she whispered. Kojo did not answer. "Sir, what did you sell?" He looked at the little girl being rushed inside on a stretcher. Then he said the simplest thing. "My work." The child survived the first critical hour, then the second. Then the specialist arrived. Kojo waited outside longer than he meant to. Partly because the mother, whose name he learned was Miriam, had no one else. Partly because once you have lost everything in one decision, another hour no longer feels expensive. By evening, Miriam emerged from the treatment room with swollen eyes and trembling hands. "She is stable," she said. "The doctor says she came in just in time." Kojo nodded. He should have felt relief. He did feel relief. But relief and dread can live in the same heart. Miriam tried to kneel before him. Kojo stepped back quickly. "No, no, please." "You do not understand what you have done for me," she cried. "You saved my child." Kojo's voice was tired. "Take care of her. Please tell me your name." "Kojo." "Kojo what?" "Kojo Mensah." She repeated it like a prayer she never wanted to forget. "Kojo Mensah." Then she asked the question he had been avoiding. "What did you lose?" He gave a small, broken smile. "Let us just say," he replied, "I hope your daughter uses this life well." He left before she could ask anything more. The walk home was the longest of his life. His feet felt heavy. The sunset looked cruel. He could still smell the sea, but now it no longer smelled like possibility. It smelled like something he had been exiled from. When he reached the house, his mother knew immediately. A mother can read disaster before it is spoken. Kojo, Essie said quietly. What happened? Abina came from the back room smiling at first, until she saw his face. Brother? Kojo sat down on the wooden bench outside and stared at the ground. Then he told them everything. Not dramatically, not with tears. Just plainly. The woman, the child, the clinic, the money, the boat. Silence followed. The kind that rearranges a family. Abina covered her mouth. Essie sat down slowly. For a long time, nobody said anything. Then Abina whispered, You sold the boat? Kojo nodded. Our boat? He nodded again. The one father left? Still he nodded. Abina turned away and began to cry. Not because she was ungrateful, not because she lacked compassion, but because sometimes goodness arrives looking exactly like ruin. Their mother finally spoke. Did the child live? Yes. Essie closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet but steady. Then God saw you today. Abina looked up sharply. But what about us? It was not rebellion. It was pain. Real pain. Kojo answered honestly. I do not know. Act 4. When the town turns against you. The news spread faster than Harmattan fire. By the next morning, everyone at the harbor knew. By afternoon, the market women were discussing it between customers. By evening, people who had never sacrificed anything in their lives had formed strong opinions about Kojo's choices. Some praised him in the safe way people praise suffering they do not share. Others laughed. There goes Saint Kojo, a man said at the chop bar. Can holiness buy fuel? Another replied. A group of fishermen shook their heads when he passed. One day emotion will finish that boy. You cannot save the whole world. A man must protect his own house first. Every sentence landed like sand in an open wound. But the hardest blow did not come from strangers.
It came from Akosua, the woman Kojo had hoped to marry. She came to see him that evening wearing a blue dress and an expression he could not read. At first, she said nothing. Then she looked past him toward the empty yard, as if the missing boat itself could still be seen. Tell me it is not true, she said. It is true. She laughed once, but there was no joy in it. You sold your boat for people you do not know? A child was dying. And what if your own family now suffers because of it? Kojo did not answer quickly enough. That was answer enough. Akosua stepped back. You always do this, she said. You carry the world as if you are responsible for everyone. She would have died. And now what? What will your mother eat? How will Abina go to school? What future are you building? Kojo's voice deepened. I could not watch her die. Akosua stared at him for a long moment. Then she said the sentence that stayed with him for weeks. You are a good man, Kojo. But good men do not always make safe husbands. When she left, Kojo did not call her back, because somewhere deep inside, he feared she was not entirely wrong. The first week without the boat was difficult. The second was humiliating. By the third, it became something worse. Normal. Kojo tried to find work at the harbor, loading fish baskets onto trucks. Some days he got hired. Some days he did not. The pay was small. By sunset, his shoulders burned and his palms were blistered. but the money in his pocket still looked too thin to argue with. The trader in Takoradi delayed payment. The landlord came twice, then 3 times. The roof began leaking just as the rainy season arrived. Abina's school deadline passed. Her admission was deferred. She said she understood, but Kojo could hear the quiet crying at night through the thin wall. Their mother's cough returned. One evening, there was nothing in the house but gari and a little salt. Essie mixed hot water into it and smiled as though it were enough. Kojo watched her pretend not to be hungry, and something inside him nearly broke. Still, he kept moving. He carried sacks of cassava at dawn. He helped mend nets at noon. He unloaded crates at the roadside depot. Sometimes he washed taxis for coins. Once, he spent an entire day pushing a broken-down bus from one mechanic yard to another just to earn enough for bread and kerosene. Rain soaked him. Sun burned him. Pride abandoned him. But Kojo did not become bitter. That was the unusual thing. He grew quieter, yes. More tired, yes. But not cruel. Not hard. One evening, after a brutal day at the harbor, he saw an old blind man trying to cross the flooded roadside. Without thinking, Kojo took off his own sandals, rolled up his trousers, and guided the man through the muddy water. Another day, he shared half his lunch with a street boy whose hands were shaking from hunger. At church, he began repairing broken benches for free, because, in his words, a house of prayer should not wobble when old women sit. People noticed. Even those who mocked him noticed. Because true character becomes easiest to see after loss. When a man has money, kindness can be decoration. When a man has nothing and still gives, that is who he truly is. There was one thing Kojo never told his family. The money from the boat sale had not fully covered the clinic demand. He had added the small cloth bundle meant for Abina's registration. Every cedi. He had also given Miriam his own old mobile phone before leaving the hospital, so she could contact her relatives. So when people in town praised him, saying, "At least he only lost the boat," Kojo would simply nod. He did not have the energy to correct them. Some nights, he lay awake, listening to rain strike the zinc roof, and wondered whether he had made the bravest decision of his life or the stupidest. He replayed the moment over and over. The child on the ground, the darkening lips, the mother's voice, the price of the boat. Would he do it again? The answer came every time, painful and immediate. Yes. That was what made it so hard, because regret is easier to carry when you know you were wrong. Kojo believed he had done the right thing, and still, the right thing had wounded everyone he loved. That contradiction followed him everywhere. What Kojo did not know was that Miriam had been searching for him almost from the moment her daughter regained strength. The little girl's name was not even Miriam's daughter by birth. Her name was Adjoa, and she was Miriam's late sister's child. After her sister died, Miriam had taken the girl in and raised her as her own. That day in Elmina, Miriam had been traveling with Adjoa to seek specialist treatment after months of unexplained attacks. Her desperation had been real. Her poverty had been real. But there was another part of the story Kojo never heard. Miriam worked as a long-time household manager for Madame Efua Bediako, founder of one of the largest fish processing and coastal transport companies in the region. Madame Efua was a powerful woman, but she was also known for something rare among the wealthy. She listened. When Miriam returned and told her how a fisherman had sold his only boat to save a child he did not know, Madame Efua did not treat it like a pleasant emotional story to discuss over tea. She asked questions. What was his name? Where was he from? What exactly had he sold? Had he left any contact? Miriam only had the old phone Kojo had given her and his name. Kojo Mensah. The phone had already stopped charging. The clinic register contained only fragments. For weeks, people were sent quietly to different landing beaches and market areas asking after him. But Kojo had become difficult to trace because he was no longer where he used to be. Without the boat, he spent less time at the harbor and more time chasing small jobs inland. Then, 1 month later, the landlord finally sent them out. It was not dramatic. No shouting, no police. Just the cold mathematics of unpaid rent. Essie packed their things into sacks. Abena folded her books carefully. Kojo carried the charcoal stove, 2 basins, a cracked mirror, and all the shame he could not name. They moved into one room behind his uncle's unfinished blockhouse on the outskirts of town. From there, Miriam's search went cold. But Madame Efua did not forget. Some people owe gratitude with words. Others repay it with intention. She was the second kind. The lowest point came on a Thursday. Kojo had spent the entire day hoping for work at the transport yard, but younger men were chosen ahead of him. By evening, he had earned nothing. Nothing. He walked home in the rain carrying an empty bag so his family would not immediately know. When he entered the room, Elmina was trying to study by a weak, rechargeable lamp. Their mother was coughing into a cloth. On the floor sat a bowl with only boiled plantain, plain, without stew. Kojo forced a smile. "Ah, tonight we eat like chiefs." Elmina tried to smile back, but her eyes gave her away. After the meal, Essie slept early. Elmina pretended to read until she could not keep her eyes open. Kojo stepped outside alone. The rain had stopped. The night smelled of wet earth and old sorrow. He sat on a broken cement block and lowered his head into his hands. For the first time since selling the boat, he allowed himself to cry. Not loudly, not like a child, but like a grown man who has held too much inside for too long. He cried for the sea. He cried for his father. He cried for the admission letter folded in Elmina's bag. He cried because he was tired of being strong in a world that rewarded hardness more often than goodness. And while he sat there beneath a torn sky, he whispered a prayer so small it almost disappeared into the darkness. God, if I have been foolish, forgive me. But if I did right, please do not let my family be destroyed for it. Then he wiped his face and went back inside. The next morning, he got up before dawn again, because pain does not excuse absence. Life still calls your name. 93 days after Kojo sold his boat, the harbor woke to an unusual sight. 3 black SUVs rolled slowly onto the dirt road near the landing beach, raising small clouds of dust behind them. Men stopped repairing nets. Women paused over smoking ovens. Children ran closer. The vehicles were polished, expensive, and utterly out of place among salt-stiff ropes, peeling canoes, and cracked coolers. Kojo was there that morning, helping unload baskets for a trader from Cape Coast. His shirt was faded. One slipper was beginning to split at the side. He did not even look up at first.
Then he heard his name. Not shouted, called, carefully. Kojo Mensah? He turned. A little girl in a bright white dress stood beside Miriam, healthy, smiling, alive. For a second, Kojo did not recognize her. The last time he had seen her, she was gray with distress and vanishing before his eyes. Now she looked like the very proof of breath. Miriam's eyes filled with tears the moment their faces met. "It is you," she said. Kojo set down the basket slowly. "Adjoa?" The little girl nodded shyly. Then, before anyone could say another word, she ran forward and hugged him around the waist. The harbor went completely still. Kojo looked down, stunned, as the child held on to him with the fierce certainty children have when they know who saved them. "You came back," he said softly. "You told Mama to use this life well," the girl replied. "I came to say thank you." Kojo swallowed hard. Then he noticed the woman stepping out of the second vehicle. She was elegant, composed, dressed in a deep green kaba and slit, with the presence of someone accustomed to being obeyed without raising her voice. Miriam turned toward her immediately. "Kojo," she said, "this is Madame Efua Bediako." Even the fisherman nearby shifted at that name. Everyone knew it. Madame Efua was one of the most influential women on the coast. Her companies employed hundreds, some said thousands. She walked toward Kojo and studied him for a moment, not with pity, but with respect. "So," she said, "you are the man who sold his only boat for this child." Kojo lowered his eyes. "I only did what anyone should do." Madame Efua smiled faintly. "No," she said. "You did what very few people actually do." A small crowd had gathered now. Curiosity had swallowed the harbor whole. Kojo stood there, uncomfortable under so many eyes, with fish scales on his hands and salt on his shirt, while wealthy strangers looked at him as though he mattered. Madame Efua gestured toward the water. "Miriam told me everything," she said. "At first I thought it was one of those stories people exaggerate. Then I learned the details. The clinic confirmed them. The trader confirmed them. Even the old boat buyer confirmed them." A ripple of embarrassed laughter moved through the crowd. Kojo said nothing. Madame Efua continued. "My company is launching a new coastal rescue and transport unit. We have boats, cold chain trucks, and a medical response partnership for villages where children and pregnant women often die because help comes too late." The harbor was silent again. "We have been looking for someone honest enough to supervise the first local operations base here." Kojo blinked, confused. "I am not educated enough for such work, madam." She nodded as if expecting the objection. "You can read. You can write. You understand the sea."
You understand people. And any man who will lose his livelihood to save a stranger's child has already passed the hardest test of leadership. Kojo's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Miriam. He looked at Adjoa. He looked at the men who had mocked him. It felt unreal. Madame Efua signaled to one of her assistants, who brought forward a brown envelope and a folder. Inside the folder were documents, employment papers, a housing letter, training details in Cape Coast, a salary far beyond anything Kojo had ever earned. And then came the part that made the old fisherman exchange disbelieving glances. "There is more," Madame Efua said. She pointed toward the road where a brand-new motorized rescue boat, painted blue and white, was being slowly towed into view. On the side, in clean, bold letters, was a name. Kojo's Hope. The entire harbor gasped. Kojo stared as if his mind could not process what his eyes were seeing. Madame Efua spoke gently. "That boat belongs to the rescue unit you will help manage. It is not a gift for pride. It is a tool for purpose. But yes, Kojo, once again, the sea will be yours." Tears rushed into his eyes before he could stop them. Then Madame Efua added one final thing. "And your sister, Nyame Nhyira. Her deferred school fees have been fully paid. Her admission has been restored." Nyame was not there to hear it. But somewhere far away, it felt as if the future itself had just opened a door. Kojo covered his face with both hands. The strong men at the harbor looked away, pretending not to be moved. But many of them were. Even old Kwesi, the trader who had underpaid for the boat, shook his head slowly and muttered, God has a long memory." By sunset, the entire town had heard. The same streets that once carried laughter now carried astonishment. The same people who called Kojo foolish now called him blessed. Some said they always believed in him. Some suddenly remembered speaking well of him. That is the nature of human beings. Many want to be near the fruit, but not the season of the roots. Akosua came that evening. This time she did not stand proudly at the gate. She stood quietly, almost uncertain. Kojo was outside with his mother and Nyame, who had just returned from town after hearing the news and crying so much she could barely speak. When Akosua saw the joy in that tiny yard, she seemed smaller somehow. "Kojo," she said. He looked up. "I heard." He nodded. She took a breath. "I spoke from fear before." Kojo said nothing. She continued. "I thought life would crush you for being soft." A small smile touched Kojo's mouth. "Life tried." Akosua lowered her eyes. "I was wrong."
Isi, wise enough not to interfere in the private matters of grown hearts, stood and went inside with Elmina. Kojo and Akosua remained under the evening sky. After a long silence, Kojo spoke carefully. "I do not hate you for what you said." She looked relieved for half a second. Then he finished. "But I learned something. If a person can only stand beside me when my hands are full, that person cannot build a life with me." Akosua's eyes shone with regret. Some lessons come too late for repair. She nodded once and left. Kojo watched her go without bitterness. Not every door that closes is a loss. Some are protection. The months that followed transformed more than Kojo's bank account. They transformed his reach. He trained with marine responders. He learned emergency coordination, fuel management, coastal communication protocols, and first response transport systems. For the first time in his life, he wore an official uniform with his name stitched neatly on the chest. His mother moved into a clean staff house with proper roofing and running water. Elmina resumed school and thrived. She studied harder than ever, as if she understood that her education now carried a testimony bigger than herself. And Kojo never forgot what hunger felt like. That was why, after his first 6 months on the job, he asked Madame Efua for permission to start something extra. A small hardship fund. Nothing flashy, just a quiet emergency pool at the harbor for fishermen, widows, and travelers caught in sudden medical crises. Madame Efua agreed. Miriam helped manage records. Elmina volunteered during school breaks, and Adjoa, the little girl who had once hovered between life and death, grew into the bright heartbeat of the whole project. Whenever she visited the base,
she would run straight to Kojo and ask the same question. "Uncle Kojo, how many people did you save this week?" He would laugh and give her a number, sometimes 1, sometimes 3. Once, during a storm, 7. And every time he answered, he remembered the day strangers stood in a circle and watched a child struggle while life waited for a payment slip. He promised himself that as long as he had strength, fewer people would be left helpless like that. Years later, when people told Kojo's story, many told it badly. Some focused only on the miracle at the end. Some talked as if kindness had been instantly rewarded. But that was not true. The reward did not come quickly. It did not come easily. And it did not erase the nights of hunger, the humiliation, the fear, or the tears he shed outside that unfinished blockhouse. The truth is more important than the fairy tale. Sometimes when you do the right thing, life gets harder first. Sometimes obedience looks like loss. Sometimes character costs more than comfort. And sometimes the people mocking your sacrifice have no idea they are watching the beginning of your testimony. Kojo did not help that child because he expected an SUV, a job letter, or a branded rescue boat. He helped because a human life was fading in front of him, and his conscience refused to step aside. That is what made the story powerful. Not the reward, the choice. Because blessings that follow integrity are beautiful. But integrity before blessing, that is rare. One quiet evening, long after the rescue unit had become a trusted lifeline across the coast, Kojo stood alone by the water. The sky was orange. The tide was gentle. Behind him, men were securing ropes and laughing after a long day. In the distance, Kojo's hope rocked softly against the pier. Adjoa's laughter drifted from the office where Miriam and Elmina were talking. His mother sat beneath a tree peeling oranges for children who had gathered nearby. Kojo looked at the sea, then up at the sky, and smiled. Not because life had become perfect, but because he finally understood something his pain had taken time to teach him. Nothing given for love is ever truly wasted. So tell me, if you were in Kojo's position, would you have sold your only source of income to save a stranger's child, or would fear have stopped you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful original African stories. Because sometimes the story you need most is the one that reminds you that kindness is never weakness. It is courage in its purest form.